Welcome to Lead with Giants TV. My name is Tal Schnell. I'm your host this evening, and I'm delighted to have Patti Johnson here from Dallas, the author of Make Waves. Welcome to our show.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you, and we're both enjoying the Dallas fall weather. It's just a beautiful start here. And also joining us is Liston Selly. Welcome.
Thanks, Tal. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you. And just a little background, I ran into Patti with a good friend of mine, John Mertz, here in Dallas from the Authentic Leadership Dallas here, and we connected and appreciate the connection I have with John and as well as Patti. So very nice to meet you.
Yes, we'll do it in person soon.
Yes, please. So Patti, tell us about, I want to actually introduce Patti to the audience as well. So Patti Johnson is a career and workplace expert and the CEO of People Results, a change and human resources consulting firm she founded in 2004. She and her team advise clients such as PepsiCo, Microsoft, 7-Eleven, Accenture, Frito-Lay, and many others on creating positive change in their leaders and organizations. Previously, Patti was a senior executive at Accenture. So I see a lot of Dallas corporations here as well, so that's interesting. Yeah, let me just start off. So in a way, you are a wave maker yourself. You transitioned to something in your personal life, right?
Thank you. Well, yes. I mean, for me, it was definitely a wave when I started my business because, to be honest, I had been a corporate girl much of my career. So big management consulting firm, tons of infrastructure, tons of just global scale. And I started my own business and thought I had all the answers. In fact, I didn't. I had to figure a lot of that out myself. And it was a steep learning curve, and it was probably the best decision I've ever made. But yeah, it was definitely a wave for me. That's for sure.
So what inspired you to make that wave for you personally? What inspired you? Is that something you always wanted to do?
To be honest, not really. I mean, I always tell people I was talking actually to an SMU class of entrepreneurs on Monday, and I love talking to college kids and students, and I was telling them, I wasn't born with this just innate desire to have business at all. In fact, it sort of developed over time, and it probably took me about 2 years to get the courage to go do it. And for me, I could kind of create the career that I wanted, and that was really important. Really interesting work, clients doing strategy, and also figuring out how to make it a reality, have some control over my life.
Right.
It was just for me, it was the right combination to have the career that I wanted on every front, and it was great.
So define for our audience, what does it mean to make a wave, and how does someone create their wave?
Right. It was kind of funny because when I first, when you write a book, I mean, when you first get your contract and everything, one of the first things you do is you agree the name of the book and a brief description, because they're going to go start working on distribution. And so when we agreed on Make Waves, I had a couple of my friends that said to me, like, I thought that was a bad thing to make waves. Are you sure you want to call your book that? Because it does bring to mind kind of a troublemaker. And to be honest, I kind of liked it, because if you want to change something in your life or in your career, whatever it is, your work, you can't keep doing exactly what you've been doing and expect that, voila, it's going to turn out differently. Right. And so you have to change course. And so I like that metaphor, if you will, of actually getting started. And so I think that's the mindset that we're talking about. Figure out what impact you're trying to have, and how can you get started and help it spread.
And how does someone kind of discover that? They want to really make the difference, but how does that come about to someone?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because when I first did my outline, I was so focused on the actions. What are the steps? What are the actions that we take to actually get a change started, or an idea turn into reality? And one of the things I really learned was, as I started studying and interviewing all of the people who had done this, I had kind of what is probably pretty obvious. But about a quarter of the way through, I realized it's not just what you do. The biggest battle is how you think about it. And that, for me, was my Oprah aha moment. It was sort of like, oh my gosh, it's so obvious. Why did I not realize that? Because the people that really do this, they might have fears. Some had fears, some didn't, but they're able to find the path forward. They find progress, and they are willing to try to turn their idea and their change into something. And it all starts in their head. They don't let their fears overtake them. They don't let their perfectionism, stop them dead in their tracks. All those things. So a lot of it, we get in our own way, don't we? I mean, I think a lot of it starts with how we think about it and how we look at those opportunities we see.
Yeah, I'll come back to that. Let me also have let's jump into our conversation as well.
Patti, while you're talking about fear, could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I think that's what stops a lot of us.
It is.
We think of everything that could go wrong instead of thinking of everything that could go right. And how can we overcome that?
Right. And I think you're so right, Liz, because we all have those fears. Some of us call on it more than others. And you think about it, in other situations, the person who can anticipate all the problems, actually that can be a very good quality. If you're in a certain kind of role and being able to anticipate, that's a great thing. When it comes to starting a change, your fear can absolutely stop you dead in your tracks. And so one of the first things I often tell people is you have to know, we all have our go-to fears typically. We have those obstacles we put in our own paths. One of the things I really like, and actually I took this from Brene Brown, and if anybody's not familiar with Brene Brown, you should be. She's amazing. And one of her exercises is to fill in the blank of, I'm not blank enough. And if you can answer that question, I think that is often at the root of the fear that's going to get in your way on a change. So I'm not smart enough. I'm not important enough. I am not experienced enough. I'm not funny enough. Whatever it is, those are the things that will come up again and again and again. And I'll speak selfishly for myself. I have perfectionism tendencies. I want everything to be perfect. I want everything to be right. And when you're starting a change, you're not going to be able to figure everything out. You just can't. It hasn't been done before. If it was that easy, it would have already happened.
Right.
So you've got to be willing to recognize it's not going to go perfectly when you're starting on something that's new.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
So how does let's expand on that, Patti. How does you are there with that piece of paper? How do you having that moment that you are writing these things down and you're honest as you can, because that's part of the fear, is that sometimes people are just having that hard time translating that fear and saying,
correct.
So here I am and I'm writing this down. How do I overcome that?
Right. Well, I'm not a psychologist, so there are limits to what advice I can give there. But I do think, what is the expression? Awareness is the first step.
Right.
And I think if for all of us, if we know that if I'm someone who's always going to be looking for the perfect answer, then I can say, okay, I know I have those tendencies. I can start to say, when is enough? When is something good enough? When do I know enough?
Right.
And be willing to trust my instincts a little bit more. So I think whatever that is, whatever those fears are, and I'll give you an example. I was coaching someone a couple of months ago, and this amazing woman, so smart. If you looked at her resume, you would just think, this is somebody who has just completely accomplished all of her career goals. Yet she wanted to make a move and do something different, but she stayed in the same company, in the same role for longer than she wanted. And we started talking about it, and really what it was hers was, I'm not smart enough. And she'd had the sisters who were the superstars, had gone to the great schools, made the great grades, and so she had some of that internalized from when she was a kid, really.
Right.
And she started realizing that, in fact, I have I've accomplished a lot. I've done what I want in my career. I can do this again. And kind of, it's almost like a confidence issue. But her fear was still tugging at her and had been for many, many, many years, to try to make sure she was right.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to that because I think that, and recently I was reading about how when we have those, the fears are the biggest obstacles. So it does get people stuck on their dreams.
It does.
And it's almost like I finding myself having a conversation with Mr. or Mrs. Fear, and I use this analogy. I bring courage into the room, and I have courage, and Fear have a dialogue.
Right.
But I think that just having kind of what you alluded to is having compassionate to yourself and gentle with yourself without being too hard on yourself, because you can actually flip those questions around and say, well, what are some of the things that are enough, or you kind of seeing the glass half full, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So I see that a lot, especially the transition you made. You saw in your previous job with Accenture probably qualities that you can bring into the coaching aspect of it, right?
Absolutely, and in the consulting work that we do, for sure. The other thing that I think is relevant to what we're talking about here is if you have fear or if you're uncertain, sometimes we think about, I want to go do this, and it seems just insurmountable. But if you start breaking it into, what can I do today? What can I do this week? It makes it feel smaller. And I think it's also one of the things, it's a very entrepreneurial mindset of, I'm looking for progress. I use the term incrementalist. And I also think that it's a very entrepreneurial skill. You think about the entrepreneurs in the world, they find, I love Bret Hart, who was the creator of Bizarre Voice. His quote was, "Motion creates motion, momentum creates momentum." So get going, get out there, get started, and there will be some dominoes to follow. That mindset.
Right. Very true. Talk to us about what kind of questions do we need to ask ourselves when we're thinking about making waves. You share that in your book. What sort of questions do we need to become that way, to make those waves?
I think that I found wave makers really focus on 3 core questions, all asked in their own way, but at the root, one of them, which seems so obvious, is the what can I do? And the reason I really like that question is because it has 2 parts to it. One, it's not what everybody else can do. It's not everything that's wrong or the conditions that aren't perfect. It's what do I have influence over? What do I have control over? And then the second part is the word do implies some action, right? I can have all these great thoughts, but if it doesn't translate into the do, then they're going to stay thoughts. So I think that's question number 1. I think the second question is, how can I help? Sometimes it's not just your way that you're trying to start. Maybe it's somebody else has a great idea. You want to be part of it. You want to contribute to a community, just like the community you've created, with Lead with Giants. There's a group of people that care about this topic. So how can I help? And then the third one is, the big one, is what if? What if we, could help the homeless in our community? What if we offer different services to our clients? What if? And ask that question, because kind of over time we ask that question a lot when we were little, and we kind of over time
I really love
these.
I love these questions because they're so empowering, to where, like you said, it's not finding fault or blame outside of your circle, but then it gives you the power to where it's kind of the reverse of fear, is that I have power. I can do the small things, and even if it's just one small things, and I am empowered to make that difference. And even if it's just assisting somewhere in the community, things like that are so empowering.
Absolutely. And often if you ask yourself those questions, the other thing I always say to people, if you could ask yourself the question, what can I do? There's always an answer. It may not be life-changing, but there's always something. And get in the habit of asking those questions. It's going to lead you toward some progress and movement, which is what, in a change, is what you're looking for, is that movement, toward where you want to be.
Great. Well, let's conclude here segment one if we want to dive into more of that conversation. So
Sure.
we'll finish up here, but thank you, Patty and Liz, and we'll
Absolutely.
get our audience to this next one. Really lively discussions. I appreciate that.
Sure.